Welcome to the moment that changed everything, where we interview notable creative people to gain insights into how they got started and learn more about the moments that shaped them and their careers. Today, we sit down with Steve Miller, Executive Creative Director and Vice President of Fuse Marketing. Steve has led an interesting life, from his beginnings as a budding songwriter to a stint at Cossette in Vancouver to shaping One Method upon its launch in a small apartment in Mississauga.
It's often hard, I find, for clients to take off that client hat and put on that consumer hat. When you're on social, you just have to talk the language of internet. If we speak their language, they're just going to connect with us that much more.
In this episode, we hear how he got his start as an account executive and made the jump to creative, his advice for senior teams who want to move up the management ladder, and why wearing sunglasses to an interview is, how should we put this, not advisable. Hey, Steve Miller.
Hello.
I wrote an intro to this podcast, and then I went back and looked at it before we came out this morning, and I can't believe you showed up because it's such a cheap opening. It's like, his name's Steve Miller, and so is the famous recording artist Steve Miller, and I'm going to make it about that. The hardest part for me actually to go away from that was the fact that you have a musical background, so it was even tougher to kind of go, you're not going to bring up the fact his name's Steve Miller, but
I've heard a lot. A lot. In fact, at Fuse, where I'm at now, I guess before I arrived, the agency let the agency know I was coming. And a particular millennial who, I guess she thought that like Steve Miller had finished his music career and was making his way into advertising.
Right.
Yeah. I think she was, I don't know if she was pleasantly disappointed or just disappointed when I arrived.
He's changed a lot over the years.
Yeah. I mean, looks good for his age.
Yeah, that's right. So looking at your profile, I noticed that you've spent a fair amount of time in music. Is that like a private passion? Is that something that was it a first love?
It was a first love for sure.
Mm-hmm.
It is a current love, and it has remained my first love. I think if I could play music and perform as my vocation and still manage my meager lifestyle, I think I would do it. I loved it. And I started playing guitar in grade 9. It was a course at my high school, and I figured, well, I could get a good grade out of it. I kind of took it as a bird course, to be honest.
Yeah.
And then probably 3 months in, I was hooked. And for the next, 8 years, I just played music.
It's funny. I mean, most people I talk to, when I ask them like what instrument they played and when they got into music, and I guess it was, I know we did it like middle school.
Yeah,
so maybe grade 8 or 7 or something like that.
Yeah.
I honestly want to say 90% of people say clarinet.
Really?
Yeah, I played clarinet, and I just feel like it was like, maybe it was just a big section. I don't know.
Yeah, I like the clarinet.
Yeah.
I'm a big fan. In grade 7 and 8, I remember you had to choose your instrument, and myself and my friend Joe, we were the last ones to pick. And the teacher said, all that's left is percussion and the baritone. And whoever gets here tomorrow morning first can choose first. And I think I arrived at about 6 a.m. because I did not want the baritone, which is a mini tuba.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, so
it's not the one you get inside.
No. I think, what's a sousaphone? I think that's called.
Yeah, that's right.
No, not the one that you get inside. So I did. So I played percussion in grade 7 and 8, and again, kind of because it was like for me, what I thought was the easy thing. But I had been writing songs since I was probably 8 or 9.
Really?
I just liked writing songs, and so I wrote a song about Wayne Gretzky. I wrote songs about snow. I wrote songs about rain. I don't know. I just wrote songs.
And who encouraged you? Were your parents kind of like, write us another song, or?
I don't know where it came from. I liked music, and my parents liked music. They're not particularly musical. My father does one type of dance, which is odd. Yeah. And my mother, likes music. My father only listened to 70s country. That's what I grew up on.
Well, you know what? Guilty as charged for me. I love 70s country. I love it. I love the storytelling of it.
Yeah.
When this thing called New Country came about, I was like, what's this garbage?
Yeah.
I was like, I love those old stories. My mom listened to like Conway Twitty.
Oh yeah.
George.
George Jones, Waylon and Merle.
All those guys. Yeah. That's what I grew up with. It was kind of the faint sound of a vacuum and that music playing. That was my childhood.
Right. And Steve.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. No, so that's what I grew up on. And so I don't know, maybe I listened to these stories and wanted to write them out. But yeah, I was kind of writing songs as a kid. And then as I started to play guitar, it came easy and I started writing more, sort of adult songs. Not in that way. Right. And so I think by 16, I had a band and we were playing universities and bars by 16.
I mean, I don't want to jump back in the flow of this conversation, but I think anybody listening is probably thinking, you mentioned your dad knew one dance. The next beat was 70s country. Am I going to make an assumption and say line dancing or
No, it's a very odd little standing in one spot.
Oh, okay. It was the dad dance.
Yeah,
okay.
It was exactly.
Okay.
It was a dad dance.
There you go.
Yeah. But that's kind of where music started for me and I loved songwriting and I loved language. My father is an architect and he was a very good storyteller and he had a great sort of vocabulary for language and so I really liked writing, but songs. That's I didn't particularly love English in high school or anything like that, but songwriting for me was a fantastic expression of emotion and storytelling and I loved it. I still do.
Man, I would say good for you because it takes such guts. I mean, when you think about songwriters and the great songwriters, the ability, it's something that I look at and I just marvel at because, if you're able to write something that emotionally moves people, you're amazing, right?
Yeah.
And I think songwriting is one of those things that it can look on the surface can look like it's easy, even if it's I don't know if it's not a deep song, but it's a whatever.
Just a poppy song,
that's right. Yeah. But even that's insanely difficult.
Yeah.
Right?
I mean, the words are one thing. And, yes, you want them to be meaningful and you want people to basically get a reaction from them, have an emotion, connect with them. And then you have to usually add a melody to it that sounds original. Right. And then you have to add some chords to it that sounds original and works really well with the melody and also works with the cadence of the song. And yeah, some of the best songs that I wrote that I personally thought were the best. I don't know if I'm a good songwriter or not, but they wrote themselves. They were done in 30 minutes. I wrote others that took days. You would get back to it and you would sort of fix a verse. And then the next day you might think, that didn't sound great. But I always thought that the best sounding, what I thought were the best lyrics were written in like an hour.
Interesting. We had the pleasure of working with Yamaha in their music division. We got to interview a lot of accomplished artists, Yamaha artists. So we have some experience here talking to them. One of the things that comes up from them is this move from a deep passion for music into a professional sphere, and how it's like it's not for the faint of heart, and that the life of a musician is a different kind of life.
Yeah.
And I know I've worked with people who have had a great passion for music. At what moment do you look at it and think, I can make this work professionally, or I want to make it work professionally? Or what was the series of events to make you decide that maybe this isn't something that you're going to do for a living?
Well, I definitely wanted to be like a rock star, or basically a folk rock star, because the music we played wasn't like rock; it was kind of folk rock. And I loved the performing. I loved being on stage. I loved having the audience there and affecting an audience and having them be affected by you. So I'd loved that side of music as well. I didn't think that I would ever be that kind of musician or artist who would be okay living in a basement apartment for 30 years and playing dive bars and doing it for the music. You know what I mean? I definitely enjoyed the performing side. And so the band broke up. We had some issues.
Creative differences?
Yeah, we had issues.
Yeah.
Nothing major, but just people wanted to travel or move out west. One of my friends in the band, he wanted to just focus on bluegrass music. And he now is actually in probably one of the top, I don't know, 3-4 bluegrass bands in Canada. He still plays. But I loved the performing side, and I also wanted, I didn't want to just live sort of, call it paycheck to paycheck, if you will, or gig to gig.
Oh, yeah.
And so I felt like I also didn't want to start over again when the band broke up. I was about 23 or 24, and I felt like I didn't want to start over again. And so I turned my creative efforts elsewhere.
So I'm sensing that we're going to allude to maybe how you got into the advertising business. What's the story behind that? How do you go from the band kind of being dismantled and then making your way into advertising? Because there is some synergies there, but like, how did that happen?
Yeah, my father in the early 90s, my father's architectural firm had some difficulty. There was a housing crisis, and so that sort of folded. And quickly thereafter, he became chair of architecture at Ryerson, which is great. I happened to be sort of directionless at the time because the band broke up, and it had been 3 or 4 years since I graduated high school. Hadn't gone back to school or anything like that. But I figured, well, his family get a discount, and an education's a pretty good idea. So I thought, okay, I'll go get a business degree. Seems like a logical thing to get.
Sure.
Probably come in use down the road somehow, some way. So I enrolled in their commerce program at Ryerson and ended up majoring in marketing, and I minored in economics, of all things. In high school, I didn't apply myself fully. I was playing music a lot, but in university, I decided I'd apply myself and really, really enjoyed it. And I loved marketing. I really liked economics, of all things. And when I graduated, I had a friend of mine who was an account executive at Leo Burnett. And in Toronto. Yeah. And I liked creativity. I was a musician, and before that I drew cartoons, and I was sort of like, I liked art and this sort of a thing. So I thought, okay, well, like, I just graduated with a business degree, and maybe I could go be an account person. I like people. I'd worked 10 years in sales, from, phones to khakis to paint to whatever. And I like working with people, and let's try this out. And so I got a job offer at Wolf Group.
Okay.
Do you remember Wolf Group?
I have heard of it, yes.
It's a long time ago.
Yeah.
And I had been interviewing at Leo Burnett. This friend of mine sort of got me in, and they didn't typically interview people from Ryerson, but I guess a friend of a friend. And they were taking 3 positions, and Jerry Frescione.
Okay, sure.
He said, you're 4th on the list. I said, oh, okay.
Meaning you were shortlisted, or you forced to just apply?
I was 4th in line, and they took the other 3 ahead of me.
Okay.
Yeah. So that was sort of like a nice consolation sort of thing.
Sure.
I was like, oh, okay, great. And I don't know, about a month later, I got a call from Wolf Group to come in and maybe interview for an account job there. And Jerry had moved from Leo to Wolf Group.
Okay.
And I guess he remembered me. And so I got a job offer. The same day, my girlfriend at the time, who's now my wife, got accepted to do her master's at UBC. And so I turned the job down, and off I went to UBC, and she did her master's out there. And again, through my father, I owe him a lot. I got a job as an account executive at a package design and branding firm called Coup Creative Group.
Okay.
So I started, it wasn't an ad agency, but it was package design and branding, which I loved. I loved design. And so I started off my sort of career tangentially in package design and branding.
So had you accepted the job at Wolf in Toronto and then the relevation?
No, it literally the same day that I got the offer, she got accepted.
Okay.
Quite literally the same day.
So you had to call Frescione and say, you know what, my life circumstances have changed and I'm headed out west.
Yeah, which killed me because, I wanted that job. So that killed me. But then so I worked for an agency called Coup Creative Group.
Yeah, let me ask you this, because that sounds familiar to me. Was Rick Kemp there? Cool.
I know. I mean, I know the name Rip Kemp.
Yeah.
I don't remember if he was or not. No.
Yeah. Okay.
But Coup Creative Group. So I was there for about 3 months. After about 3 months, September to December, I had the realization that an account person type role wasn't for me. You know, there were things about it, not to get into it, but it just didn't turn me on, for lack of a better phrase. But I stuck it out and I did my job and it was good. And like I said, I love design. But then Coup Creative Group got bought by Cossette. And so we moved into the Cossette building on Homer Street.
Okay.
And one night I was leaving and a creative director within Cossette said, "Hey, Steve, could you maybe think of a line to write on this box that we're sending out to the media to introduce this new brand and new logo for this company? And we want the media to be intrigued to open the box." And I was like, okay, sure, I can.
Let me think back on my business degree.
Yeah, let me look through my economics textbooks and see if I can do that. So I went home that night and I was up till sort of like 3 a.m., lost track of time. I was sketching and doodling and writing and just trying to think of ways that might be interesting, tying the brand into things. And I came back the next day with 10 lines for the top of the box and they liked one. And the client ended up liking it. And then they said, "Could you write the inside as well?" Yeah, okay, sure. I can do that. And basically for the last 6 months of being an account person at Graph M Coup, I was writing ads and I was doing a lot of writing. And I thought, I kind of like this. This is what I like.
Did you have to go to them and say, "Hey, you know, maybe we could make a title change in my, you know, because I'm doing other things that aren't account work," or did they do that?
I knew that my time was going to be up anyways, because I knew that my wife was going to be graduating and I knew we'd be going back to Toronto.
I see.
So I kind of soaked up as much writing as I could to sort of make what little portfolio I could. And then a good friend of mine was at BBDO and he had graduated a couple of years from Humber before that. Mm-hmm. And so I contacted him and said, like, so kind of how do you get in this game? Like, kind of a thing. I've done a little bit of writing. I've been an account person for 2 years. Like, you know, what do I do? And he suggested I go to Humber and that'd be a good place to sort of get a book together. And so that's what I did next is I went off to Humber and did that for a year with Jane and the gang up there and put a book together. Promptly called my friend at BBDO as my first opportunity to maybe get in the door somewhere. Yeah. And funny enough, I got an interview at BBDO to get an internship there. And I interviewed with him and his partner at the time to kind of vet my book, I suppose, and they thought it was okay. And so then I went to go talk to Jack Neary, who was president and chief creative officer at the time. And I was nervous and, you know, I wanted this job and I'm so close kind of a thing. And I hope he likes my book. And he was flipping through it. And, you know, as he's looking at every ad, I'm trying to gauge his reaction. And I'm thinking, oh, why did I leave that one in there? And this kind of thing. And he closed it up halfway through. And I thought, well, this
is it. I'm a goner.
This can't be good. Yeah. And he said, "I hear you play guitar." I said, yeah, I do. And he said, well, if your book is good and if you join the BBDO band, we'll bring you on. And I said, sign me up.
Sold.
Absolutely sold, yeah.
Wow, amazing. Yeah. That's a great story. So who was the creative team at BBDO that you knew that was helping you get in the door?
That was Jamie Markovich.
Okay.
And David Houghton.
Okay, yeah, okay. I've heard of those guys.
Yeah. And I knew Jamie outside of advertising. I knew him from university. Mm-hmm. And then I had met David in that meeting. And even in that meeting, David had some really wonderful points of advice, even in that first look at my book. And then I looked to David a lot for guidance. He was just a great all-around advertising creative guy. Yeah.
Yeah, you know, if I could go back in time and kind of see the people that critiqued my book, we talked about this a little bit off camera about the assessing and critiquing of creative now has changed a little bit because the media has fragmented so much. I know when I put my portfolio together, I'm sure the case was the same with you, is that you had what was, traditional advertising. You might have an outdoor campaign in there. You might have a print campaign.
Yep. Long copy ad.
Long copy ad. Of course, they had to know that you could write more than 3 sentences.
Yes. Yeah.
And you kind of stuck to those, those print type mediums. And now I wonder, what does a portfolio look like? Do you see social campaigns? Do you see digital campaigns? I'm assuming the answer is yes.
The answer is yes, for sure. In fact, I often will say to students or to young people, in the business already, I'll often say, I want to see just some great headlines. I just want to see the bare bones of an ad, and I find often in a lot of people's books are sort of products or ideas, the innovations on a product or this sort of a thing, which is great. And a lot of clients do ask for that and they're open to that.
Right.
But I often say, look, you've got 4, product innovation ideas in your book, but I don't actually see any headlines. I don't see any sort of campaigns with legs that can stretch across multiple channels. Sure. And the ideas are really fantastic.
Yeah.
But I still need to see that you can write and think and do so in a way that has lots of legs.
Yeah, there's a whole art to putting together a portfolio that I think anyone on the outside might think, it's almost a disservice to call them samples, because there's a lot of strategy when it comes to putting together a portfolio. I think for writers particularly, being able to write in different voices is critical for you, because if you can do humor, that's fantastic. You're going to have to lean on that. But if you're selling life insurance, you're going to have to be able to be mature and be able to write in different voices. And it's important to see tonal shifts within a portfolio. That's when you know that someone is really, really good.
Yeah. And especially with social, because you're writing post copy for multiple brands across multiple different targets. And you have to be able to change that voice. Otherwise it just sounds inauthentic and it doesn't sound real and true. And you have to be able to turn that off, almost like an actor. You have to really be able to turn off and on those personalities.
I don't know how long you spent in Vancouver. I was going to say, because I think you're from Leaside.
Yeah. Right.
So I don't know if you were there long enough to experience any kind of cultural differences between Ontario and BC. But did you when you were there? Did you notice a change there?
Yeah, for sure. So I was there about 2 years. And my father is from there. Okay. So I had visited, a number of times, but I lived there for 2 years. And I would definitely say Vancouver has more in common with LA than really the rest of Canada in terms of the vibe, in terms of the sort of energy that's there. It was definitely not a stark contrast to Toronto, but there was a big difference in lifestyle, what you did after work, your approach to work. As a Toronto kid who didn't do a heck of a lot of outdoor stuff, it was quite different.
Yeah, that's interesting, because I know that's a whole other thing. Being able to approach communication in a market that and then kind of going. We had Ron McDonald in here who's been 7 different continents. Far East and stuff like that, having to think of ideas that are visually driven because there's a language barrier. But I wanted to ask you that about Vancouver, because
it was and you'd say you're from Toronto and they would hate
you.
Yes. No. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. I remember the receptionist at Coug Creative Group. I guess after a few months of being there, she sort of said, for a Toronto guy,
you're okay.
Yeah, you don't sort of seem like you're from Toronto, yeah. And I guess I took that as a compliment.
Maybe you can thank your father for that. Or something.
Yeah, exactly. I've got those Vancouver roots.
Yeah. So now let's move to your current position at Fuse. So first of all, you must do a fair amount of hiring, maybe firing. We won't talk about the firing, but you must do a fair amount of hiring there. How do you think the landscape of running an agency has changed, given the fact that you likely started in somewhere in the 90s?
When did I start? I started in just after 2000.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wow. Really showing my age then.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
99. I started in 99 as an account exec.
Okay.
Yeah. So 99 is when I started.
So were you seeing a big change in media at that point? Likely not.
No. I mean, honestly, it really wasn't until. And we were talking about this off camera as well. Clients dealt with broadcast and print predominantly, and then this digital thing came along, which was a website and some banner ads, and that was manageable. It didn't take a heck of a lot of sort of marketing per se. It was more of a functional information sort of a thing. The banners, yes, but still nobody really clicks on them anyway. It wasn't until social came, that it got complicated for everybody. And by social, I don't mean just when Facebook came, but when sort of the 6 or 7 other platforms showed up. And then they started diversifying their ad units and going from organic to paid. And it's an ever-changing landscape that we as agencies have to keep on top of, let alone educating, our clients about it too. So it got challenging.
Yeah, this is another point I wanted to bring up that we had chatted about, which was this fragmentation of media has meant even channel strategy.
Yeah.
Yeah. Talk
It's
a little
huge.
bit about that, because I think that's a real insight.
Yeah. I mean, I think that, in the strategy department, you have your sort of planners and there are social strategists, and in your media, you have media planners as well. And then I think somewhere in between is sort of a channel strategist, because they have to have a really strong understanding of the media landscape, but they also have to have a really good understanding of the consumer, or consumers, as now we sort of look at tribes in ways that we can target. So the client only has a finite number of dollars, while many social channels and opportunities have opened up, their wallets haven't necessarily increased, in the same rate. So I think channel strategy is so huge, so that not only contextually are you relevant from a messaging standpoint, but from where you are putting that message, I think is even just as contextually relevant now too. So I think that channel strategist should kind of live in all of us a little bit, from creative to strategy to media to we should always be thinking in that way, as we would anyway about, I think, who we're targeting and who we're trying to talk to.
Yeah, I think I think the big deal there is this idea of targeting. I think traditional is quite a broad targeting scenario. You would see, in the worst types of briefs, you would probably just get an age group that spanned 50 years or something like that, and they're women. But but now you look at the niche quality of these social platforms, and the targeting can become insanely specific.
Yeah, which means insanely awesome. I love the fact that you can be so relevant. And I remember there was this years ago, there was this great table that compared sort of digital social to post-digital social with a number of categories. And one of them talked about, with mass advertising, you're sort of making acquaintances. But with digital, you can kind of create friendships, which I like, which are more one-to-one. And I think with the targeting that you can do now, I love the fact that you can get even deeper emotionally, not just demographically, but I mean emotionally. You can target these tribes, and you can take your brand or your product, and they have their RTBs, typically from a functional standpoint, but you can relate emotionally to different people at different points in their life, at different points in their year or in their season, and you can be hyper relevant, which I just think is an art. I love it.
How do you find your clients right now in terms of their level of sophistication on how to interpret the success on social?
Are my clients going to see this particular podcast?
Well,
that may determine my answer.
Yeah, let's protect the innocent here, and we'll use code. But the point I'm trying to drive at is it easier to sell to someone who has a certain level of sophistication? Because I think there's still a lot of clients who will come out and say, "Well, we need a viral campaign," which is, to use Terry O'Reilly, one of my ex-bosses, rub a lamp. right? Like,
Yes.
in your wildest dreams, that would be amazing. And I'd love to say poof, that will happen, but that's
Yes.
a phenomenon.
Totally. Yes. The short answer is, yes, that that it absolutely helps if your client has a fairly good grasp of particularly the social networks and those channels and what you can and can't do on them, how you should be in those channels as well. Because it's often, and I was talking to somebody about this yesterday, it's often hard, I find, for clients, to take off that client hat and put on that consumer hat,
right,
and really think like a consumer, talk like a consumer, be where they are. Because when you're on social, you just have to talk the language of internet, which typically flies in the face of how a client or a brand in most other channels will talk. And that can be really hard for clients to get a grasp on. They feel often like we're moving away from our brand guidelines.
Right.
But we're actually moving closer to social guidelines. And if we stay true to our values as a brand, and if we stay true to the sort of ubiquitous reasons why people would want to have a relationship with your brand, if we speak their language, they're just going to connect with us that much more. So I think the more that they can either be educated through agencies or the more they understand those platforms, absolutely, I think the smoother the process will be to try to get the best work out.
Yeah, I think to your point, you mentioned earlier that it's been an amazing thing. And I think it is an amazing thing when it's approached in the right manner. I think when I think about traditional advertising, I think because it was around for so long, everyone knew what it was and how to interpret it.
And how to measure it.
And
Absolutely. What to spend on it.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. And it was in a way, it was okay for it to be advertising. When you get into social, it changes the game a little bit, right? Because I think we've all seen very successful brands on social channels behaving as though they're on traditional channels
all the time.
So, you go on a McDonald's feed or whatever, and there's shots of the hamburger, and you look at it and you go, well, that seems like a wasted opportunity because there should be a dialogue and there should be engagement, and we already know that, or whatever. Is there a lot of splaining that you have to do with clients when they decide to dip their toe into that world?
There is. I think, aside from what I mentioned previously about kind of consumer hats and client hats and stuff, I think the other thing sometimes that we all can forget, but I think often the clients can too, is sometimes you can think about these channels with blinders on, and you forget, oh yeah, there's TV running, or oh yeah, we have a whole print campaign, or oh yeah, we've got those in-store posters. So sometimes when you think about social, or any channel, you have to think about it in its totality in terms of what are the vehicles and what are the best, traits or best attributes of this brand that we should talk about in these different vehicles. Social is going to be a particular one, and we're going to talk a certain way, and we're going to talk about things that are relevant in that space and in a certain way. But again, maybe the outdoor is going to look different. There's TV running. So I think sometimes, and even banners.
Yeah.
So I think sometimes, which are basically just online out of home,
right?
Basically. I think sometimes not only is it about understanding the channel, but also understanding that it's not the only way that we're communicating. Remember, we've got some other channels that are happening at the same time.
Yeah, that's a very good point. And that's sometimes, I think, earlier on in your career when you're trying to sell work, and sometimes if you hit an obstacle where a lot of clients are going to want, I think I worked with somebody who used to say, trying to put, 12 pounds of potatoes in a 10-pound bag. You're always going to have to fight that a little bit, I think, because it's everyone's nature to try to do everything in one spot.
Yes.
Without considering, to your point, the mix. We touched a little bit on the art of sales when it comes to advertising. I know you've got some strong opinions about that, as do I. I've made the point before that, highly creative people aren't necessarily the most successful people. That the art of selling is a huge component of getting good work out there, and tenacity as it relates to that.
Yeah.
Did you find that your account side or your business side or your economic side helped in that regard? that maybe you didn't come from a purely creative place?
I think the being the in a band on stage probably helps more than anything else. But absolutely, the marketing background, the analytical sort of background. I've always loved strategy. I loved analytics. I was actually going to go into market research before I was a suit at. Do people still say suit?
I don't know, actually.
I
It's a
don't
good
know
point. I know what that means. I think everybody else knows.
I don't think anyone does.
P.S. It's an account person. That's what a suit is.
Maybe they think I was going to Tip Top Tailors or something. But before I was going to be an account exec, I actually was considering doing market research because I love extrapolating insights out of numbers. I just think it's interesting.
Right.
I don't know why. I just do. So I do think that on the creative side of the table, having a bit of a marketing background, having an understanding of consumer behavior or strategy or what are insights, or even just understanding what a marketing person, everything else they're thinking about.
Sure.
Advertising is 10% of their job.
Yeah.
It might be the most interesting part of their day, but it's a small part of what they do. And so when it comes to the sort of selling, I think being able to speak their language is important. But selling is also, as we talked about, I mean, you might have something that's gold, but unless the client believes that it is,
right,
they'll never think it is. And you've got this sort of mechanical left-brained person that a creative right-brained person is trying to sell to.
Yeah.
It can be a bit like oil and water. It's trying to communicate this idea, again, to a very kind of analytical, mechanical thinker. And so it's an uphill battle. And typically I would say, again, no offense to clients who might be, listening.
Right.
But clients can be conservative sometimes. It's easy to do the safe thing. It might protect their job. It might mean they get their budget next year. It might mean that we do okay out there. To do the more provocative work or innovative work, or to not just meet your KPIs, but to exceed the hell out of them, often takes work that makes clients uncomfortable. So as we talked about before, I think the journey to the idea in your presentation, that is the sell. If you can get them on board and have your client nodding along and understanding the target and the strategy and the insight and the setup and whatever you show them on that reveal slide, they're probably going to like.
Yeah.
Probably.
Yeah.
And for me personally, I don't do it personally to win an award or to win accolades. I spent 14 years with One Method, and I was employee number 6. And I went to business school with a Min who started One Method with 4 people in his condo in Mississauga. And when I joined One Method, there were 6 of us in that condo. And then a week later, we moved to an office. But for 14 years, we didn't have any retainer relationships. We were really only as good as the last campaign we did for that client. And the client wasn't going to come back because we won 6 awards for it.
Yeah.
The client was going to keep calling us because it worked, because it earned results. And so we always felt like we always had to earn our client's business. And so when I'm working with a team and we're building those 14 slides up front to sell them on the idea we're trying to sell, it's not a selfish reason. It's a selfless reason. It's really about trying to get the best work out for that client because we want them to look like heroes.
Yeah, I think when you talk about that and you talk about taking risks, I mean, I won't reveal who the client was, but I'll tell you a quick story about working on the production side on a campaign, and it was for a well-known beer brand. There was an idea that was an intriguing idea where it was going to be hiding beer in various spots around the city, and then there would be this sort of reveal of how you could get it.
Yep,
it's kind of a contest-based thing. The beer was encased in a silver suitcase, okay? And I was brought on through the casting and I was brought on through all this stuff. The creative team was a couple of very serious guys, good at what they did. It was very well executed. And this whole time, we didn't really realize that it could be in some way construed as dangerous.
Right.
The campaign really set off alarm bells because when it launched, these silver cases were left in parts of the city. And so
Right.
you know how the rest of the story goes.
Absolutely. Yeah.
What's that? Why is it there?
Yeah, get a bomb
Danger,
squad down
danger.
here.
And
Yeah.
I think they shut down like a whole city block.
Yeah.
Where am I going with this story? The point of the story is that I think what a lot of people don't realize is you really stick your neck out when you ask a client to take a risk and it doesn't go well.
Yes.
And yet at the same time, I mean, Babe Ruth struck out a lot. Mm-hmm. So there's always this element of trust that if you're going to have a client who's going to take a risk and they put their money down and they say, I'm trusting you, Steve, to be able to there's a hope, there's a want. And even then the best laid plans can go awry.
Right.
How do you deal with that? Have you ever had an experience where that has happened, where you've now had to go back to someone and say, I know you took a risk. I know we got blown up. We got blown up together, but now I want you to still be with me.
That's a good question. Has that ever happened? Nothing comes to mind where that has happened. I find that you won't minimize risk through trying to tell someone that the campaign is going to be so awesome.
Yeah.
And it's going to be so funny and people are going to relate to it. Platitudinal statements typically kind of fall on deaf ears. Mm-hmm. I think you minimize risk with proof, with fact, with backing up the strategy.
Right.
So if you can give proof points around the way consumers interact online, if you can show stats from reputable places around how they talk to each other, what they're into culturally, maybe you use proof points of other brands in the space. I think the more that you can analytically help reduce that risk, it's in those upfront slides.
Sure.
And, that's how you're going to do it. You're going to kind of speak their language if you can do it. We worked with a painkiller who was sort of, 1 or 2% of the marketplace. They were, I think the focus group put it as they were like the RC Cola of cola on the shelf kind of a thing. Mm-hmm. And in focus group, they said, it's a stranger. I don't even honestly know like anything about it. Like they mean nothing to me.
You're right.
And it was going to be delisted. And so they needed a campaign to really get noticed and to go out there and shake things up. In that situation, they couldn't have any risk, to be honest. But they still wanted to test the spot. Mm-hmm. That certainly minimizes risk. Mm-hmm. And that helps the agency say, you know what, we are confident enough that we're good with testing it. Mm-hmm. And now you can actually do fantastic testing with like 500 people overnight online and just get some gut checks.
It's a whole other episode.
It's a whole other thing. You're not, yeah, no kidding. Yeah. But you don't have to spend thousands of dollars anymore to get just a gut check on how an insight's going to relate or how a piece of creative is going to fly. But with this particular campaign, the whole upfront section of the deck, we still felt like we needed to give them some comfort and that, hey, we can do this. And so it was all about deep diving into this Gen Z target, deep diving into how they talk, lots of examples to show how they talk, lots of stats, to back it all up. And once they felt comfortable with the approach, then it was about selling them on the sort of creative interpretation and why that was going to be good. Mm-hmm. But it actually just relates back to everything we talked about. It's the language they speak. It's the people from that group. It basically everything just checked boxes to what we just said.
Right. Yeah.
And so we could minimize risk that way. And it's one of my favorite campaigns that I worked on. And what was amazing to see is it was predominantly digital, YouTube and social. I think it might have gone on TV for a little bit as well. But I would go every day and I would read the comments in social and on YouTube. And people were saying, "You're my best friend. What you just showed was me on Tuesday." I believe we had close to 2/3 of the shares were organic. Sorry, 2/3 of the people who shared it Let me repeat this. 2/3 of everyone who saw it shared it.
Wow.
It was that meaningful, and it was that deep, and the relatability was just so incredible. And watching that every day, seeing these comments, that to me was the most fulfilling.
And was it a description of how their pain felt? Was that the thing, or it was
Yes.
something else?
No,
it was.
That's exactly what it was.
This feels like it's an 8-inch drill that's going.
It was a boardroom with a whiteboard inside a uterus, and it was women inside the boardroom in the uterus trying to decide how to inflict pain on the woman's menstrual cramps, coming up with different ideas. And they ended up running out of time, and they ended up the host body of the uterus took the pain medication, and then they all got really upset because they were just getting on a roll with the brainstorm of the different pain they could inflict.
And after this, you became the uterus guy.
Pretty much. Pretty much.
It set off a host of
uterus campaigns.
Based campaigns.
Yeah, everything from that point forward.
Well, I've had the pleasure of interviewing some high level female creatives here. We've talked about this, right? About your ability to try to be in the shoes of the person, the end user. As a creative person, it's part of your job to be able to at least try to imagine what that would be like. And I think we all suffer from the same thing and how many times have you heard this in a meeting? Yeah, Steve, but you're not the target. So all of a sudden your opinions don't matter anymore. Right. Even if you can say, hey, I can imagine being uncomfortable in a boardroom and wanting that to go away. But yeah, it's an interest. I always, tell people that being a creative in this business is all about sort of knowing a little bit about a lot of things rather than a doctorate in singular things.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I think somebody once told me years and years ago that the best advertising people are observers. They just observe life. They observe how people interact. They observe how they travel. They observe what they do on a bus. And I would look out the window as a kid and just watch the world go by, and I would see things and remember things. And so I think knowing a little about a lot is synonymous with kind of just being an observer of life, and it gets stored somewhere, and so when you work on a brief that you may not be that target, you've probably watched that target in some way, shape, or form, and you can glean, some little elements from it.
It's good at dinner parties too, because you tend to know a little bit about everything so that you can actually get a conversation started.
Absolutely. Yeah, you can usually contribute in some way. Like on that last project I talked about with the uterus, the strategist on that business, she was integral to the success of that campaign, because it was a very empathetic approach. And it was that insight and the way that women were speaking online that I think absolutely drove the relevancy for that brand. And it didn't get delisted, and it did very well for them. But that was one of the most rewarding moments for me was to connect that deeply.
Yeah, that's great, and getting that kind of feedback, knowing that you had an instinct to go somewhere and that it would be right, and it actually happening, it's got to be a good feeling. Yeah,
it was great.
We have a competition that we just introduced last year, but it's called NAC Ideas, and the notion here was that you probably have work that you've done that died in testing that you still loved, you still felt that would be effective, highly creative, and maybe you feel like didn't get a fair shake in terms of how it met its demise. You must have the same thing. You must have something. Sometimes it'll survive in your portfolio too. You'll have something that's quite old that you still look at and go, I still like it. It's still good, and people still respond well to it.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I remember years ago at One Method we worked with Dyson, and we always wanted to put on the the street vacuum cleaner
yeah,
buggies that go around. We always wanted to put a bumper sticker on those that said, "My other vacuum is a Dyson."
Nice. Yeah, I love that idea.
I always wanted to do that.
Who doesn't buy that idea?
I know.
Yeah.
They didn't. But we always wanted to. Maybe I'll go call Hoover and see if they want. I don't know if Hoover would have the same kind of, quality of product. But and then we actually just did a pitch just before the holidays for a laxative product that I thought it was a. Yeah,
I was going to say, that's a slippery slope. Every possible thing that you could think of.
Oh, yeah. We spent about 6 months getting all those out.
Right, sure.
It was a flood, if you will, of different puns. But anyways, I actually wrote a song about it years ago. I digress. But we developed what I thought was a really smart, wonderful, campaign for that particular category that maybe one day will resurface. I'm not sure. But.
You mentioned the word empathy. We had Baron Manette on here last couple of weeks ago. He said, "Look, at our agency, we try to start from a place of empathy, and back to your, the cheapness that can come with certain products. Everyone says laxative, and they have a big joke, and it's really funny. And you forget that there's actually people who need it, and actually there's a lot of angst with it.
Oh, and pain, and
I can remember working on something that was called. It was to help stop something called hyperhidrosis." And if you don't know
that's sweating.
That's sweating.
Yeah.
Right?
Excessively,
that's right. It was a black shirt campaign because what tends to happen, the phenomenon that happens with people with hyperhidrosis, of course, is that they're trying to camouflage the fact that they're sweating. And black garments happen to do that really well. You're not going to walk around in a white linen shirt if you have hyperhidrosis.
No.
And these poor people don't want to be it, to have it. They're born with it.
Yeah.
As it turns out, Botox injections are something that can actually help a person with this
in the moist
area. That's right. Palms included. People have a real problem with sweating and stuff.
Yeah. Which would make palm reading a lot more difficult.
Yeah, that's right. It's just a slick surface that I'm getting nothing.
You apparently don't have a life.
Yeah, that's right.
But you're awfully dry.
Yeah. I think when you think about the creative process and given tough briefs, I think that is a really tough brief. I mean, I talk to people who don't work in advertising. I try to explain to them what our jobs are. I don't know if I'm sure this exists with other vocations, but there seems to be a lot of confusion about what we do. I guess it doesn't help when you have stuff like Mad Men where, Ham walks in and just slays everybody just off the top of his head. And people kind of turn and go, "Is it like that?" And I was like, no, it's never like that. Also, no one's that good looking in real life.
And no one, we don't always have a glass of whiskey in our hand.
Oh, gosh. I mean, I'd love it if that were the truth.
Half the day, yes, but not all day long.
Yeah, those days are kind of gone. I was kind of on the tail end of that where it would be like, people would actually... commercial director houses would bring you out and you'd get sloshed at lunch and stuff like that. But those days now, I mean, gosh,
no,
everybody's ripped.
Yes.
But Josh, you know what I'm talking about. So great. So I always like to ask, particularly people at your level, about their advice for someone younger who wants to get in the business. What are the key things that they can do to increase their chances of being hired, because you're in that position a lot? And then maybe it's a two-part question, sort of related, which is, what advice would you give someone who is at a senior level in a creative position who can then make this jump into management? Because they are largely every person that I know who has made that leap from senior creative to a management position, it's usually in the form of a complaint, which is, I spend way more time in meetings now than I ever do working on creative. And I see a lot of frustration too with very senior, very good creatives who are now in a managerial role who really want to get back to the fun part that is creating. So kind of a two-part question: advice for juniors, advice for maybe mid to senior who want to move into executive level.
Yeah. So, junior, it's kind of twofold. It's those who aren't in the business yet, but who want to break in. And then I think there are the sort of juniors, quote unquote. I just like to refer to them as just inexperienced.
Sure.
I think the term junior comes with connotation and expectation and hesitation. And so I don't like to use that personally. But those who are inexperienced, like how do you make a name for yourself? How do you get those great briefs kind of a thing? I think for those who want to break into it, it's a matter of sort of understanding that you can, that it's not this like closed off crazy world that you only hear about in movies, but it's an actual real thing. And that there's also lots of different ways to get into advertising. It can be through strategy, media, PR, accounts, and certainly creative. And creativity, I think now isn't limited to simply copywriter or art director. I think creativity or being a creator, you can join an agency in I think a couple of different capacities, whether it's video, whether it's copywriting, art direction, whether it's technology. I think there's lots of ways to kind of break into the industry. I also think there are more educational opportunities as well. Almost every college now has an advertising program, from Seneca to Mohawk to Humber to George Brown, OCAD. There's lots of ways. And many of them are general programs so that you can, you'll do 2 years of general and then you do 2 years of specified, be it creative account or media or strategy. So I think there's lots of ways in now. I think 20 years ago, there was Humber and there was OCAD. Right. Or you knew someone.
Yeah. And there was a lot of guys who just like came in, put some stuff together. And
totally. Those observers of life who had a geography degree from Queens or somewhere.
Right.
And they just saw the world in a certain way and they thought about it that way. And then I think internally, once you're in that role as an intern or as a junior, I personally think it's about showing passion. It's about putting your hand up if you're not busy. It's about jumping in on everything you can do. My father used to say, make yourself invaluable at a job. And so I think as an intern or as a junior, I think it's showing passion and want. And I think nowadays with a certain age group, sometimes that can be lacking a little bit. I've totally now just made
you've ostracized our entire
ostracized fuse from any young talent. But I do think that showing that passion and again putting your hand up and saying I'm not busy, give me something, or what's going on in that room, I want to be a part of that.
Sure.
I think that goes a long way, and that's what I tell students in terms of how do you go from intern to a kind of full-time job kind of a thing. You have to also do a great job. We had an intern from a school who twice fell asleep in a brainstorm. And that's not gonna really move the needle for you.
Did they give you the narcolepsy speech or
right.
Or was it just simply fatigue?
Just probably fatigue or boredom. I'm not sure which. I also had another guy, his name was Michael. And he interviewed, and I called him Mike at first, and he corrected me that it was Michael. That's fine.
Fair
It's
enough.
okay. Your name's Michael. That's totally cool. And during the interview for the job, he had his son. He wore sunglasses, and we weren't on a patio. And he left the sunglasses on the entire interview.
Interesting.
Which is fine. That's your thing, Like I'm sure that's your shtick or whatever.
Sure.
And he didn't get the job, mostly because his portfolio were club flyers, and we weren't really looking for that particular thing. But I couldn't believe that the sunglasses never came off. I just thought it was very interesting. A very interesting interview tactic.
Yeah, I mean, that again, I usually have conversations with people and then we probably, we'll pause and sort of say that's an entire episode to talk about, right? Because Josh is snickering in the corner because he knows when I sit at the lunch table here, there's people who are a good 20 years younger than me. And my views sometimes are like, I've got 3 sons. They walk into a restaurant with their hat on. I'm like, take your hat off, right? But I could be accused of just being too old school as it relates to that,
hey,
right?
maybe I'm old school, but I'd love to see your eyes and I don't know.
You don't have to keep the AirPods on. I mean, you could take them out. We are having a conversation.
Right? Like you don't need to keep them in the whole time.
Yeah. Josh is like, you don't get it.
Yeah.
You guys, you
so old.
moldy oldies.
I remember I said to my eldest son, he wanted me to this was when he was younger. He wasn't even in the teenage stage of this. And he was watching TV and he said, "Dad, could you read me a book?" I said, "Well, you're watching TV. I don't think now is really the right time to read you a book." And he said, No. I'll just use my peripheral hearing.
Wow. I like that.
Yeah,
a lot.
which was pretty good. But at the same time, that has now also transferred to now that he's a teenager and he's got the earpods in and just don't get me started. That is probably a whole other thing.
Listen, with some people, I turn on peripheral hearing just as a survival.
Probably currently in this particular podcast.
No.
So when it comes to to sort of creatives moving into a leadership role, that's a big one. Because I think first and foremost, you have to be ready to, as you put it, you have to be ready to not be in the weeds as much.
Sure.
You have to be ready. It's kind of like having a child. You have to be ready to give up a little bit of your personal life, right? Because you're kind of giving it up to this child. You have to be ready for that. And so I think as you move into a leadership role, so when I look for ACDs or a CD, what I'm looking for truly a mini creative director or a mini ECD. I want them to be definitely creative and be able to spot it. Somebody once said, "What's the difference between a copywriter and a creative director?" And somebody said, "Well, the copywriter thinks they have a good idea and the creative director knows that they do."
Sure. Good answer. And
so I think an ACD or a CD, they have to kind of know what's a great idea. They have to have a strategic bent to them and they have to be great with clients. Right. I think those three things are important for an ACD role. I think as you move into sort of a leadership role, as you now start to hire, as you now start to fire, as you're building the culture of your team and arguably the culture of your agency. I'm a big believer in culture. And I don't mean foosball and brightly colored walls. I mean the social behaviors and characteristics of a social group of people, like the true definition. And for me, it's people that create culture and the culture creates the work, in my opinion. Yeah, for sure. So I think when you move into a leadership role, and again, if you're doing the hiring, the firing, and you're building that culture, you're setting the tone for sort of the agency creatively. You almost have to, you prioritize those three things, but in reverse order. I think you have to be really great with clients. I think you have to be really smart creatively. And I think you have to have been at one point okay creatively, kind of a thing. Because you do spend your time in meetings. The most of my writing is pitch decks and long rationale emails to clients trying to get them back on track with something. Yeah. And then you're looking for talent and then you're trying to bring great talent into your agency. You're selling all the time in a leadership role, I find. And so I think first and foremost, you have to be ready to give up the everyday writing and everyday art directing, everyday creating. I still feel like I create as a VP and an ECD, but I'm just creating different things. I'm creating a culture, I'm creating a team, I'm creating a vibe, I'm creating opportunities. Right. So I still feel like I create a lot of rationale emails. I help create presentations and pitches. And so there's still creation. I think it's just a different kind and you just have to be ready for it.
I would say, or I'd be willing to say that in those leadership positions that it has a lot to do with someone's nature and that it's like maybe that I go back to this idea of leaders being born. Oftentimes if it's a strange business because I think the more successful you are creatively, the natural instinct is then to move that person into a managerial role. Right. But we know that, just because you're, to use a sports analogy, just because you are a great hitter doesn't mean that you're a great teacher or have the skills to nurture someone to be the best that they can do or this idea of letting go. Would you agree with that too?
Wholeheartedly. Yeah. I think actually a lot of advertising, I think a lot of it can't be taught. It's ideation, it's creativity, it's the way somebody thinks. And I think the same goes for leadership. I think you want to do it, but leadership has so many elements to it, from people skills to listening skills to you have to be selfless. You have to be able to probably, not have a huge amount of stress. I mean, there's a lot to leadership. And I do agree that I think some people are certainly cut out for it. I think some people are born with it. Some people aren't, and some people aren't cut out for it. And that's okay. I'll have creatives say to me, I want to be an ACD. And I'll say, okay, well, here's what I think would make a really, really great ACD. And I'll always say, not everybody is cut out for it. Not everybody wants to do it.
Sure.
And you don't have to. You can still be a fantastic creative person and be successful and that sort of thing. But then you don't have to deal with the kind of stuff that leadership deals with. And I agree. I think some people, maybe they come up through high school and they were president of the school, or maybe that they were in a sales role at Foot Locker and they became, the cash supervisor there, or they became the sort of manager there, kind of a thing. I think there are people who just have a sense of it. It can certainly be taught, but I do agree that sometimes it's something that's just within you.
Yeah, I mean, I'll add one other thing because I know we're getting close to the end of our time here. I want to ask you a couple more things. I think one of the things I'll ask you about is ageism in this business, because I think
because I'm old.
Well, yeah, it's like, what are you going to do in the next 5 years? You're not going to be doing what you're doing now.
Just ask me point blank.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, I think, and I've explored this topic with other guests too. I think everyone on the outside still looks at advertising as a pretty cutthroat business, and one that kind of, sets old copywriters on the ice floe and kicks you out into the water and kind of says, time to die.
Yes, definitely.
But what do you think about ageism in this business? Does it exist? Is it just not a business that can have at someone over 50?
I think you should keep really old people in advertising. I say that facetiously. I think there is ageism for sure.
Yeah.
I think there's an expectation that if you're young, you're hip, and if you're old, you're not. And I think advertising is deemed as hip, and some of it is, from a social media perspective, absolutely. Social media is culture. And if you are not in bed with culture, if you don't understand what's happening culturally, then I think you're going to have a hard time creating culturally relevant content in the social space.
Sure.
But I also think you can be 50 and be totally into that culture and really understand it. I think it's a mindset more than it is a number.
Right.
We did a campaign for a nutritional beverage that typically was targeted at 65 plus, and now I can walk, and I got my 26 vitamins and minerals. But we changed the strategy, so the strategy was about feel age, where it's not kind of your age, but it's how you feel inside.
Sure.
And often we feel about 10 years younger. And I think if you're old, if you can channel that feel age, and if content excites you, and if culture excites you, and if understanding TikTok and understanding what's coming up next, then I think you can certainly be more relevant. I also think as you get older in this industry, I think the more the value that you can contribute to an agency, the better. So I think as a young copywriter, you can provide fantastic copywriting. I think as you get older, the progression might be that you can add some leadership to your team and maybe be an ACD. Maybe you can start winning business and you can be really, really great in pitches. I think as you get older, the more value that you can add to your agency, I think the more time you'll spend there.
Right.
And I think it's a mindset. I think ageism can be beat by just mindset, and I think the value that you add.
Yeah, it's great. It's great advice, I think. Instead of looking at it or thinking that you're old. And plus, I mean, 50 is not old anymore. Even in categorically speaking, it's not what your dad was at 50.
No.
Not that dancing in one place is a problem, but
which he's made a fantastic career out of.
I want to follow him on Instagram. I got to see this thing of just, swaying back and forth, to Conway Twitty. I'll wrap up here by asking you about what's going on now, or what's got you excited. What's on the horizon that you're kind of jazzed about?
Yeah. So I made the move from One Method, where I'd been 14 years and helped build that agency and build it to what it is. And I made the move to Fuse about 10 months ago. And Fuse is an agency that's been around for about 17 years. They are very good in a number of areas, and they wanted to get better in other areas, internally and externally. So for me personally, what I'm most excited about is the next chapter for me. I'm really excited to be with awesome partners, to have great people there, to see where this agency can go in the next 3 to 5 years. It's a challenge for sure for me personally, but it's an exciting one. It's building something. It's being a part of something. It's trying to change perceptions of your own brand versus the perceptions you change for the brands that you work on. So that's the most exciting thing for me. That's for sure.
Yeah, I mean, my follow up to that would be, how do you manage these types of personnel changes with clients? Because I think agencies will decide to bring in somebody new. We all know that it's a results driven business. It's never something that happens that is supposed to be seamless. You're supposed to see some movement. For clients who are comfortable, how are you managing that?
Yeah, it is hard. And every client is different. And some clients will get very uncomfortable with the notion of now there's somebody new again and somebody here. And some are okay. Years ago, a client said to me, all I want you to do is manage my expectations. And I thought that was the best description of account management, is really managing your clients' expectations. If a website's going to be late, I think so long as they know, then
it won't be a disaster.
It won't be a disaster. Yeah. And so for me, managing expectations is how I always speak to account people. If I'm interviewing them or if I'm talking to them at a school, to me, that's the biggest thing. And so when it comes to changing personnel on a line of business, which certainly I've been through, I think if you can show the consistency on the business. So, Bill is still on your business, and Stephanie is still on your business. They're the anchors. They're still here. Yes, we're changing up the account coordinator, or yes, we're bringing in a new strategist on your business. But you've got those two there who know your business well. They've been on it for a long time, and what these two are going to bring are these things. And we talk about their pedigree. And so I think if you can manage their expectations, and if you can make them feel as comfortable as they can. Now, if it's happening over 7 months, at some point you're going to have to say, look, totally sorry. We are missing the mark on this, but your product's still doing amazing. We still just killed it on the KPIs last month. And we're going to get it right. You still got me on your business. It's a matter of finding the best people to work on your business. So it's selling. It's more selling. It's a lot of selling. Yeah, it's a lot of selling. But it can be tricky. It definitely can be tricky. And consistency is huge. That's why clients stay with agencies for years, let alone just the people on that business. But if you manage their expectations, I'm a big believer in just working with good peeps. I always say I want to do great work with great people for great people. And I think if those great people trust you, appreciate great creative and appreciate a true partnership, and they don't treat you like a vendor, then I think that partnership will outlast any personnel changes.
I think that's a great place to wrap up. It's been a pleasure talking to you, Steve.
Thank you.
And getting to know you, because I've heard of you and I finally got a chance to sit down and talk with you and talk about your eclectic background. And it's been really great. So thanks so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
This episode has been brought to you by the National Advertising Challenge, North America's only brief-based challenge that sends winners to Cannes, France.